One of the most important things about working on electronics is knowing how to solder. And as it turns out, having decent equipment to start with will actually teach you how to solder at a higher level, better quality, if you start out with decent equipment, if you can get a hold of it. These are Metcal tips, and they're wonderful. You can get they have every shaped tip you could possibly imagine. And they're worth it. They last a long, long time. Years and years and years. I think I've burned out 1 or 2 tips in 16 years, and those tips were used. So I don't know what their history was before I got them, but they're terrific. The one thing that's vastly different from Metcal from everybody else is this cable here that brings the power to this tip. This isn't DC or AC, it's RF. It's 14 megahertz. So these tips are RF powered. Why does that matter? Well, what happens is, you'll know, because some of you guys have done it, that when you put your soldering iron on something, say large, that'll soak the heat away, it takes quite a while for the iron to respond and try to, answer that load. These don't have that problem. Because they're RF, if you put this against something that's sizable in mass, it changes the impedance of the tip, which instantaneously draws more power from the power supply. And I do mean instantaneously. So these hold their temperature far, far better than almost anything else you can buy. And one of the things I was lucky to get off of eBay a lot of years ago is this. It's a very expensive, this is a $350 watt meter, but I got it way cheap. And if you want to test newer used tips, you can plug them in here, and when you plug them in, they'll crank way up to here, they'll come down, they'll settle at some lower wattage. Like these finer tips will settle around 10 watts, some of the really big ones will settle around 20 watts. That doesn't sound like a lot of power, does it? Well, this isn't like when you go out and buy a 300 watt behemoth iron. These are also infinitely more efficient. This is that's 4/10 of an inch wide. I don't have a 220 transistor laying here. Maybe I do. Here's one of the best things in the world about these tips. You notice that tip fits across all 3 pins. I can literally pull a transistor off a board about 5 seconds. Really. Every single time. And then if you have to, you use a solder remover, which I also have one of theirs. It works pretty good. Sometimes you don't necessarily pull the solder out of the holes. You just hold the tip on the holes and then push this back through. So soldering and desoldering components, when you're troubleshooting, the longer it takes you, the more pissed off you get. Anyway, so these tips matter a lot, and I have a whole box full of them, but they're packed away somewhere, and I'll probably never find them. So all these tips I'm showing you are actually brand new, which really sucks. I like using old tips first, and as they wear out, replace them, but I can't find my old tips. So these are not my favorites. These are just all I could find. This is one of my all-time favorites, but for fine work, these are a lot bigger. My normal standard tip is called a 127, and these are called 144s. They work fine, there's nothing wrong with them. I've just been using the same tip for 25 years for small stuff, and it works like a champ. It gets everywhere you want to go, but I'll never find the other ones. I don't know where they are, but they work really well. And I can tell you where this started. Years ago, I worked at Apple, and in my lifetime, I can tell you that the people there were the best solderers in the world. I'm not being facetious, they really were. And I learned from them. And it turns out when you have the right tools, you can actually troubleshoot a lot faster. And in a big corporate environment like that, that matters. Well, here on the homestead, it matters too, because you don't want to get all pissed off, or you don't want to pull traces or lift pads or any of that crap. So you have the right equipment for the job. And being able to heat this up and pull these out in a second does two things. Yeah, it's faster, right? Duh. The other thing is, if your part ends up being good, it doesn't damage it. You haven't overheated it, you haven't beat it to a pulp, you've just yanked it out. Oh, it still works. Okay, then you can put it right back and keep going. So you end up spending less money, and I can tell you that is massive. Later on, I worked at a place where they had this board with probably 60 or 70 of these on the same board. This exact package, I don't remember what part it was, but it was this exact package. And there was a lady that would take one of those old manual solder suckers that you, and then hit the button, you know, that kind of stuff. And she was drawing the solder out of all three of these pins and working it out. It took her forever just to do one. And she kind of hated it. So I brought her over to my bench and I said, okay, let me show you something. So I took her board and I said, I can name that tune in 15 seconds. And she thought I was full of shit. Well, I was, because I can do it in 5 seconds. So I began pulling these out of the board she was working on. Just pow, 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 pow. And it blew her mind. So she went straight to her boss and said, I want what he has. These used to be really expensive. Before they were made in China, they were $700 for that thing you see sitting right there. And I got these used for God knows what, but I got a bunch of them. And they're worth it. I've been doing this professionally for a lot of years. Not necessarily, CBs, but electronics. And having good equipment is a big deal. And these Metcals are quite a notch above everything else, and there's a reason for it. They're actually professional equipment, and they work good. The other thing about this wand, besides that there's 14 megahertz traveling through here, is this is all conductive plastic. So this is grounded. You reach over and you touch this, you are discharged. These tips are grounded. So you're not pushing static into your electronics when you're working on it. And you're also discharging yourself. Sometimes in a real hot environment, I'll shuffle my feet and I'll come up and I'll go, and I can feel it discharge into the outside of this. So you don't find that in almost every other soldering equipment you'll ever use. There's a whole bunch of very subtle stuff here. You can hook up two different wands, two different of these, and just flip the switch to the other one. It only heats one at a time. These with the kind of the curvy face on them, these have an auto shut off. You can disable that if you like with an Allen wrench somewhere around the top, but they will shut themselves off to help your tips last longer. So then the yellow light will come on, letting you know it automatically shut off, and I forget the time frame, but it's very handy. Now this one, it shuts off automatically for me. That one, it's set to not do that. So anyway, they really speed things up. I can pull parts so fast you can't believe it, and I don't damage them. That's kind of a big deal, right? So anyway, that's just my input on soldering equipment. Then there's all the other stuff, braid and all that other crap you need. But if you start with better equipment, you end up troubleshooting faster and you learn how to solder better. This has really good plating on it, all the tips do, so they tend to solder better. The other silly little thing, and when you're cranking along trying to get stuff done, you see that hole in the sponge? You just take the tip and you rotate it around through the inside and it completely cleans the tip in one stroke. I mean, that's silly, right? A stupid hole in a sponge? But it's absolutely, when you got to do this a lot and you're troubleshooting and you just don't want to get slowed down, those sponges are huge. It's a big difference. It seems like a stupid thing till you have to do it, a lot in a day, say, or over several decades. I love these things. Plus the sponges last forever. Some of these are really old. But I've got a couple new ones in a box somewhere. So anyway, the other thing I made a video of a little while ago is I took it's not this tip, I forget where it is, but oh, here it is. I took a tip. Now this one's buried in solder because I'm not going to use it. This is not something I normally use. But this one I used to open up and spray in some electronic cleaner on this rotary switch on 4 of these Galaxy 99s. And then I had to just take the old tinning block and clean the tip back up to get all the residue off. And man, let me tell you, that was really sweet because I didn't have to, you know, there's a great video out, guys using a Dremel tool similar to a Dremel tool, a Fordham, and a vacuum cleaner, and I didn't have to use any of that. I just sit here with a soldering iron, open it up, and then clean it up, and bam, I'm done. It's fast. So again, good tools can help you get through jobs quicker and also teach you how to solder better. Because these have really, really good plating on the tips. It actually helps you solder better. It's not BS. I've used every tip in the world, every brand in the world. Well, maybe not every brand, but a lot of them. And Metcals just kill everybody else. They're the best. And that's why the pros use them. So anyway, hope any of this technical information helps. It's sure helped me a lot. Anyway, Happy New Year. See you, bye.